And in our definition, skilled agile teams are teams that are really fit for the business purpose. So we want there to be a good match between what kind of skills do these teams and what are the business needs that need to go along with this. And when we formed the Agile Fluency project, the vision that we had was of Agile done well in every organization. We hear a lot about dark Agile and fragile and all the other ways in which Agile is not done well. And but we know that when organizations adopt a kind of Agile that is a good fit for them and the teams get the skills that they need, good things happen. And so we were looking for an opportunity for all teams to practice in a zone. I'm going to talk about the zones in a minute of skilled proficiency that fits the business needs. So off the top is what the question we get a lot is, well, why are you using this term fluency? And it comes from language fluency, and it's now become, actually, it's become a popularized word over the last number of years. And now we hear people talking about all different kinds of fluency. But basically, fluency is any time you have that deliberate sort of connection between both skills and theory and are able to apply those in a good kind of way. And it's a return on an investment in learning. If you are trying to build new fluency, if it's not sort of, if we think in terms of language fluency, we all are fluent in our native tongue, the tongue that our the language that our parents speak. We have fluency in because we've grown up with it. We've been immersed in it from the beginning. But when we want to learn something new, a second language or, any number of other things, then we have to invest in that learning in order to get the kind of fluency that's going to allow us to do the things we need to do. If we're talking about languages, do we need enough language that we can go be a tourist for a couple of weeks? Or do we plan to do a live-in immersion? Or do we want to open a business? Or do we want to teach a college class? Very different kinds of fluencies needed for those different kinds of uses, different kinds of situations. So fluency is getting to the place that you can do automatically without thinking, routinely, smoothly, skillfully, easily, that enough so that it meets your needs. And that degree of fluency persists under stress and under distractions. So to be truly fluent, it has to be there for you whenever you need it. So when we think about teams, we're thinking about that same kind of thing. So at the Agile Fluency Project, we have the Agile Fluency model, which is the kind of the starter of the whole thing. And since then, we've needed to add in some additional pieces. And so I'll just mention those in passing. We have a diagnostic because people started saying, well, how do I know where my teams are now? And how do I know where I want them to be? And so on. And then we also have a way of thinking about how do we apply this information to an organization, to leaders. So then there's all kinds of additional materials that go along with each of these three parts of the suite. One of the things that we focus on that's of particular interest to leaders is the business benefits that they might get by taking thinking about Agile Fluency as they're doing their transforming. I've stopped talking about Agile transformations because I think that leaves the impression that you can be one and done. And in reality, it's ongoing. We're just like teams are never self-organized. They're always self-organizing. Organizations are always going to be transforming because that's the nature of the world. New things come up, we have to adjust to meet them. So in the Agile Fluency world that we live in, we have what kind of values do we need? What kind of business benefits go with each of the zones? So I'm going to talk a little bit about those zones. So when we created the model, Jim and I, we wanted it to be positive. We wanted it to look forward. We weren't interested in bashing what anybody else was doing. We wanted it to look at what was out there that was good that we could adopt and use. And then we wanted it to be inclusive. We don't support any particular kind of methodology or framework. We think they all have a place, because there's lots of different fluency needs in the world. So we made the model to be inclusive of that. And then we also wanted it to promote improvement. I mean, that might seem obvious given my status as the author of the Agile retrospectives, but Jim has totally bought in on that as well. So those were our values that we wanted to hold to. And so the model starts with something that we call pre-Agile, which is the phase development, waterfall, traditional ways of doing software development. And it's fine if that's working for you. We think that's just great. It tends to be individual contributors, people not working in teams. They're probably getting their tasks given to them by their managers. If that suits your purpose, if you've got the kind of repeatable work that you need to do, that's fine. Jim and I didn't spend a lot of time describing that because that's not that interesting to us. We're more interested in what happens with these folks who want to move into a more agile way of working. And so the first way we think about the sort of the foundation, we call it Agile fundamentals, is a shift to a team culture from that individual contributor culture. And we call this Agile fundamentals, and we have it as the very first zone because it's the thing that underlies everything else that we want to do in Agile. It has to do with learning to be good collaborative teams and get the most out of that. And Barry's going to talk quite a bit more about what's needed here. But in this zone, we talk about bus zones here. In this zone, the business can see progress from in a way that's understandable to them. They can redirect the teams. Teams work in small enough increments that they can be redirected when the customer feedback tells us that's needed. And they're always working on the next most valuable thing. There's been a real shift from working in terms of components in the pre-Agile world to working in terms of the valuable product increments. What is it that the customer is going to find valuable? And in order to get there, if we're starting from not having any of that, there are investments that need to be made. And this is what gets interesting for leaders. What kinds of investments need to happen? And this doesn't mean that you have to spend money, but it might mean that you have to spend attention and effort and support and things like that. So there's a list here of the kinds of investments that we see. We see teams can get to really solid, skilled proficiency in the focusing zone in anywhere from 2 to 6 months, depending on where they start from. And Scrum and Kanban, and I've seen teams just go back to the Agile Manifesto and create their own sort of ad hoc process. Any of those things can work. But so we look to figure out what are the things that are needed in this particular thing. But focusing is great, and it does underscore everything, and you really have to get those proficiencies at some point if you're going to be a successful Agile team, but it may be not sufficient for everyone. And that's the next zone, as we call the delivering zone. And this is where the really good engineering skills come in, that are shared among all the team members. So this is when teams are able to release at will, and maybe CI/CD is happening. We see problems early because we're doing this very frequent integration. And so we can take care of problems early. This is where we see teams sometimes that do very low or no bugs at all released into production. In order to do this, Again, it's an investment, but the investment may be in patience. When teams are learning new things, they go through a productivity dip. And so we may need some patience because that will enable the team to accelerate later on. They may need to bring some additional folks into the team. Now, instead of just programmers and testers, maybe now we've got DevOps or UX that are actually embedded in the team, and so on. And this takes a little longer. If delivering zone fluency is what you need, then you start with both delivering zone and focusing zone, all those skills at the same time, and you'll develop probably the focusing zone skills first, but everything else will come along more quickly if you do it all at once. Then, those two first zones are the ones that we see most often, and the ones that we hear most often from leaders and organizations, that this is where I want my teams to be. But that doesn't fit for everyone. Some teams, some business organizations need their teams to have further fluency, and that's what we call that's the optimizing zone. And this requires some shift in organizational structure. So now we're talking about, real, even more kind of organizational change, because now we're working on things that are going to affect a lot of people. Teams are going to be composed differently because they're going to be the truly cross-functional teams. Everybody in the team that needs to get the product out the door. But when you do that, you create a team that can make excellent product decisions. You don't have handoffs and wait times because everybody's right there in the decision-making process, and enables folks that we see this a lot with, like research and development teams that are working on very innovative or even disruptive kinds of products. And for these, the investment is in getting business expertise embedded in the team, giving the team the skills they need to have business ownership. They might be doing their own budgeting around their product. They have total product ownership in the teams here. And there's some additional management coaching that may need to go on, because now we need managers working very laterally across all the functions of the organization to eliminate impediments and anything that's in the way of these teams being successful. This we call Agile's promise, because this is what gets sold as Agile in a lot of places, even though it's not what everybody needs. And but a lot of these things that we begin to move even outside of the Agile world into some of these other areas of thinking, like design thinking and lean software development and beyond budgeting, and some of those kinds of things start becoming very useful here. And then the last zone that we've identified so far, you'll see this little tail that comes off to the side here in our model. That's because we're beginning to see some additional things, but we can't describe them well enough yet to incorporate them in the model. But what we can describe is something we call the strengthening zone. And this is a whole organizational culture shift, or more likely it's where the organization starts with their culture and they stick with it over time. But this is when the team is not only interested in the stories they're working on, not only interested in the features they're working on, not only interested in their own products, but also interested in the overall health of the organization. So this tends to be smaller organizations where we see teams in a desire for teams in the strengthening zone. These teams are able to really cross-pollinate from team to team. They may make sacrifices from one team to another, just to make sure that the overall organization is getting the best value, and so on. And, we see cross-organizational value streams and things like that. Here is where we see organizations, teams that are inventing new practices that we haven't seen before. DevOps came out of this. Mob programming came out of these kinds of teams. And we invest in helping the teams understand the whole cross-organizational focus, the business direction, and so on. And this tends to be most attractive to those kinds of leaders who are really interested in complexity, who are interested in alternative governance structures, things like that. So, and like I said, we're beginning to see something else coming out here, but we're not there yet. So this is the graphic. This is the pieces of the graphic that I've just showed you. You can get a copy of this graphic if you write to us at agilefluency.org. Go to the contact us form and just say, I'd like a copy, a PDF of the model graphic, and we send those out to folks. Just let us know. It's pretty easy to find us. So given all of those, given those parts of the model, we think about the business benefits that each part of that model might convey. And that's the conversation that we have with leaders. Are you interested in increasing your productivity, increasing your ROI? Would your business benefit by reducing risk or increasing employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction? We look at all of those things, and that helps to determine what zone you want your teams to be in. And many organizations have groups of teams in different zones. They may have most of their teams in delivering zones, a few teams they want to be in the focusing zone, and they've got a couple of R&D teams over here that they want to be in the optimizing zone. That's very common. It's not like it's a one size fits all for the teams, even within a single organization. So the real question around Agile Fluency is, does your organization have the will to invest in cultivating the team fluency that it needs? And that's, making the trade-offs that are needed and so on. So that's a thing to think about. And what comes out of that is also some shifts in leader behavior. Leaders being able to have more patience as teams go through these learning curves, shifting from thinking about individual contributors to thinking about the whole team and the health of the team as an entity, thinking more in terms of investing and enabling and supporting in order to help teams achieve the kind of fluency that the business needs. Sometimes that means using some of your social capital with other managers to influence them to get on board with this. And thinking in terms of systems, acting on system improvement opportunities, not focusing so much on individual behavior improvement, and keeping an eye on effectiveness over efficiency. So that's a very quick, fast running go through of all of the Agile Fluency material. If you'd like to learn more, also at our website is a free downloadable ebook. It's the same article that is on Martin Fowler's website, but it's in a more mobile friendly form. So you can download that and read it on your tablet or whatever. We have a monthly newsletter. James Shore has been working on a second edition of the Art of Agile Development. It will be coming out this fall, and it's in pre-printing production right now. And we also have workshops that help people learn more about the Agile Fluency model and how to use it in a coaching practice or how to use it as a leader. So those are some of the resources that we have, and I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Barry.
All right. Thank you, Diana.
Sure. That was a fast, you might want to, yeah, take some deep breaths and loosen up. That was a fast ride.
That was a quick ride.
Yeah.
So I hope you're all taking notes. We're going to have a Q&A session after I'm wrapped up here. We're actually going to give you a little time in breakouts to think about, what was interesting and what you can do. I see we have a request to put the last slide up or get copies. I'm sure we can figure out a way to make that happen.
Yep. There you go. take a quick screenshot.
Absolutely.
Is that the one you want or the one before that?
There was one that flashed right before you stopped.
Okay, I think that was this one. That
And
was this
not-
one.
You're not actually projecting it, Diana.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're
I'm
not
sorry. I
projecting.
gotta, yeah, I can't, it's not enough that I look at it. You mean it's not? Okay.
It was the
From
one
your
where there was
eyes
some
to-
information on additional
Right.
workshops.
Yeah,
Yes.
the workshops. If you go to our workshops and events page, all these things are listed there. We also do a twice a month town hall where people just come together and we talk about whatever anybody's interested in. So those are usually around the first of the month.
Thank you.
Sure. Go for it, Barry.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here at this point. Hopefully everyone can see a slide from me. So where Alina and Diane and I got to talking earlier this year at the Agile Open Northwest was that I was doing some talk about how I've seen teams develop and how we can help with team development. And I was reasonably familiar with the Agile Fluency project, but I had the great fortune of having Diana actually sit in on one of my discussions there. And we got to talking and I realized more and more that there's such a strong alignment here. And then having read James' latest update to The Art of Development, which I highly recommend, I began to see some real threads coming together with my own experience and work that I've been doing with teams that I had developed. So so what I'm kind of jumping into here is, first, I want to give credit to two really useful pieces of documentation. Everyone knows Diana for her book with Esther on Agile retrospectives, which I still consider the Bible. I don't let anyone I'm coaching out of the room without a copy of that book. But also, she did great work with Ainsley here on this idea of liftoff, which is how do we get teams off to a good start? You know, how do we make an event, an occasion out of launching teams? And James now has worked on taking his earlier book in Agile development and tying it together with the Agile Fluency model, and really done a fabulous job of integrating how his original attention to largely XP practices evolves into naturally this idea that teams can go through stages and we can actually apply certain practices and measurements to levels of development. So I want to give credit to both Diana and James for really helping frame the discussion, and it kind of puts a nice centerpiece for where I'm going to be talking about. I'm just going to invite you to read this quote.
Barry, your slides aren't changing. We're
My
still
slides
on
are
the,
not changing.
we're still can only see the title slide.
Well, that's kind of a bummer. Let's try this again. Are you seeing your, okay.
Yay.
Are we seeing it? Are you seeing
That
a
looks
quote there?
promising.
Woo! Okay, thank you for the shout out. So way back in '99, when Kent Beck was telling us about this crazy thing called extreme programming he came up with, this is at the front of the book. And this is the most important part of that book or any other book on software methodology or frameworks, which is that software is developed by people. And we tend to forget that, to our peril, both to our organizations and to the people that are working in our software organizations. Anything we do that doesn't recognize that software is a human endeavor made by groups of human beings is basically destined for failure. And that is something that I've really taken to heart as I spent a lot of time coaching teams and seeing the results of what happens when people are told to follow rules or arbitrary frameworks that don't actually make any sense for human beings. So one of the other things I'm seeing is a continuing lack of recognition, surprisingly, among organizations about the role that teams play, particularly in software and technology development. And at the risk of making a dangerous analogy between sports endeavors and the intellectual capital of software, if any of you are NBA fans out there, these are the stats from one player's career over 16 years of their career. And while I'm not really close on NBA, stats, I understand these are pretty good. Over, I don't know, this is like 1,000 games in 16 seasons. This player averaged between 25 and 30 points per game. They had around 10 rebounds every game and 3 to 5 assists every game over their entire career. So I'm told this is pretty good performance. So can anyone tell me, want to make a guess of what player this was? And more significantly, when did this stellar player ever win an NBA championship or championships?
Michael Jordan, and after he stopped being the best player, the best shooter on the team.
Good guess, Ron. Not right, but it's a good guess. Anyone else want to give it a go?
We have
That's okay.
Hakeem on the offer.
Could be. I would never be able to answer this question if I didn't know that this was Karl Malone, the mailman, one of the greatest players in NBA history. He never won a championship. This man had brilliant stats year after year after year. Every game he showed up 100%. He was called the mailman because he always delivered. But he never won an NBA championship because no individual can. It takes a team. And he was with the Utah Jazz for something like 18 of his 19 total years in the NBA, and the team never won a championship. And so if we ever looking for an example of why we need teams and not individuals, it's because of this, that no matter how brilliant the individual, if it's a team sport, individuals can't win. And in software and technology, it's a team sport. If there's anything that we've learned through the last, nearly 30 years of working in Agile, it's that the team is the unit of production in Agile. That's how we get work done. We can have brilliant individuals, but in modern complex technologies, no one person can do it. We need generally teams and lots of them doing a lot of complex work that has to work together. That being the case, we all want to optimize for sustainability and productivity. Sure, the business wants productivity. Let's get that stuff out. But this is a long-term game. It's a long season. So we want teams to be operating at a sustainable pace. And lastly, we know that all the tenets of Agile are focused on this idea that teams are collaborative and self-organizing, and that they own the responsibility for continuous improvement. And so any recommendation we have for developing fluency or capability in the organization has to take in mind that we're working with teams. We need teams to be there every day, show up, and have the agency and the tools to be able to build their own capability and to improve. And that's a lot of what fluency means in this context. And as if, that wasn't obvious enough, even nearly 40 years ago, people were looking at the issue of software productivity, in this case, Harlan Mills, and they observed that teams have dramatically different levels of productivity or effectiveness, like an order of magnitude. So the difference between an okay team and a great team is a 10x. So we have this legend, we like to talk about the 10x developer, but we don't need 10x developers, we need 10x teams if we want to be really successful. So what accounts for this dramatic difference in capability among teams, and how clearly do we promote the better teams? That's the challenge of bringing fluency to our organization. So as Diana introduced you, we kind of think of teams going through hopefully these 4 phases from beginning to some, not end, but a very high level on the spectrum. The focusing, the delivering, the optimizing, the strengthening. Much of the latter phases of this involve large-scale organizational change driven by the enabling teams and promoting teams. But where I think a lot of organizations that want to follow this path miss the mark is they don't focus enough on this part right here. I'm certified as a scaled agile framework program consultant, and I've worked with a lot of organizations. And one of the things that I notice is that we talk a lot about all these mechanisms for scaling up and working across teams and managing portfolios. But the foundation of all of this is the team. It's every single team in that agile release train, every single team in that large scale scrum that you have going on. And if we don't get the teams right, everything above that stalls. So we need to equip our teams from the beginning to achieve their potential before any of the rest of this can really build on. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit here in just a few minutes, in the next few minutes. So another quiz. What are the most important predictors of a software team's success? So I would encourage you to open up your chat window and type in what you think it is that would allow you to predict a software team's success. If you could measure anything you wanted. Stable teams, open communication. I'll try to measure. Teamwork and collaboration. Okay. So anything more specific we might be able to measure? I mean, is it average level of experience on the team? Is it a skill? Is it something behavioral that you could observe? Code quality. Okay. I mean, it's an important question, right? If we don't know what it is that allows a team to be successful, then we can't promote that thing. Length of time together, delivery on objectives, time to feedback. I like that one, Joanna. Okay, all good ideas. So let's dig into the research just a little bit. I'm going to tell you right now that none of these things matter. Because research has been done. Doesn't matter how great a developer some or many of the team developers are individually. It doesn't matter whether they're co-located. There's nothing technical about the platform they use or the tools or the latest sophistication of their equipment. It doesn't have anything to do with tenure. It's not even related to team size or personalities. None of those things have any correlatable effect that would let us predict a team's success. So what does? Well, one little teasing indication came from Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. If you have not read or heard 9 Lies About Work, I cannot possibly recommend this book highly enough. That is after you've read about the Agile Fluency model. So Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall, I think it's Buckingham had the background first with StrengthsFinder and the Gallup organization, building, both building the ability to survey and to understand and then be able to measure personal performance. Ashley Goodall did a lot as well. Volker, do you know some more about this? Look like you're raising your hand. You are muted.
I am muted. Oh, and the Strength Finder, there's this entire thing around helping you identify how to best use your own talents.
Mm-hmm. So Marcus Buckingham, I think, has his own consulting, and Ashley Goodall right now is working, I believe, with ADT. I might have the other way around. But basically, these two guys have spent their lives designing surveys to actually develop predictors about things in organizations. So they're not only statistically great at surveying, they also know how to design surveys to get at the absolute truth and heart of a matter. And what's great about this book is the 9 Lies About Work are the truisms that we managers tell ourselves about our organizations, which are all proved completely wrong by the research. And of course, then they tell you what the right answer is based on actual research and data. So one of the little sidelights that came out of that is they found 2 questions that can predict sustained team performance. And it's the degree when you survey a team, how much agreement do people rate these two, that they are with these 2 statements. 1, my teammates have my back. Are you a 1 or a 5 on my teammates have my back? And the statement, in my team, I'm surrounded by people who share my values. Where are you? Are you a 1 or a 5? And it turns out that if you survey a bunch of teams, individuals and teams across an organization, if you can get the answer to these two questions, you can reliably predict to a high degree, somewhere around 70%, whether that team is going to be successful. So that's pretty interesting. And this almost fell out as a sidelight of their research, because they're asking things about like employee engagement and what helps employees stay engaged with the company. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, one of the things they found out is that the more engaged people are with their teams, the higher their level of engagement with the company, and the more the likelihood of their staying with the company. Because I think, Diana, you mentioned something that, the maturity of teams varies quite a bit across the organization. So another thing that Buckingham and Good will tell us is that a person's experience of the organization is not the organization culture, it's their local culture. How is it with their team, their department, their manager, the experience they're having at the local phase of that organization? That's what determines whether or not people are going to stay with the company. It's not the, net Glassdoor score of everybody. It's what their local experience is. So this tells us that if we can get answers to my teammates have my back and they have my values, we can predict whether or not a team's going to be successful. That's pretty interesting. How many of you have heard of Project Aristotle by Google? So yes. So to really get to the bottom of this question, Google, people who have more money than God, decided, all right, we're going to figure out how this works. So they funded a department to do this project. And their charter was completely open-ended. You can have access to essentially any information we have, any research, you can bring in experts. We want you to be able to tell us what makes teams effective. How can we evaluate and measure our teams and know whether or not they'll be effective, or, support them so that they can be? So once again, for those of you who have not read this article, what would you think is the #1 predictor of team effectiveness? Let's see. Previously, we'd suggested maybe it's open communication, or teamwork and collaboration, or code quality, or delivery, or length of time. Oh, Volker, you're cheating. So the funny story is that they spent about a year making no progress whatsoever, because they were trying to look at technical factors, basically. Essentially, how good engineers are and how that relates to teams, and thinking that that would somehow translate to the success of the team. They didn't get anywhere. Eventually, they started talking to people like, psychologists and sociologists, who said, no, that's not going to make the difference. What's going to make the difference is, drum roll please, #1, do team members feel a sense of psychological safety? Single highest correlatable factor. Team members' measures of their own self-reported psychological safety with their team was the #1 predictor, followed by team members' self-rating of the dependability of their team, followed by structure and clarity. How well did they understand the structure and clarity of their teams? Followed by meaning, followed by impact. And so here are and doggone it, I typoed when I fixed my typo, Diana. You'll see there's a typo in the upper left. Diana tried to catch me on that, and I just made another error when I did it. Anyway, so psychological safety is this idea that it's safe to risk in the face of your teams, even being seen as ignorant, incompetent, negative, disruptive. Remember, this is Google. If you work for Google, you think you work with the brightest people in the world because they tell you that that's what you were when they hired you. But I feel safe to be dumb in front of my teammates. That's psychological safety. Dependability. My team members do their quality work. They do what they say they're going to do. Structure and clarity. We understand our job expectations. We know how to fulfill them. We know what will happen if we do or don't. And then meaning and impact. Meaning, we have a sense of purpose in the work or what we're doing. And impact, we think it makes a difference. What I'm doing is actually makes a difference. So as you see this, it's something of a pyramid. At the top level, we can look at leadership to really guide us, provide pictures of impact and meaning to teams. But the most foundational parts are things that happen inside the team. Among that group of, 7 plus or minus 2 people who work together day by day. And so I regard this as the gold standard in team research for technology and knowledge work. I've done quite a bit of reading, and there's a lot of stuff, but this seems as incontrovertible as we can make it. there's a lot of other supporting guidelines like this. So the net is that we in our technological organizations so devoted to the idea of, personal performance and technical excellence and all that, if we're trying to build good teams, it's the soft stuff. Exactly. It's like a team-based Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then hold on one second, you've anticipated the next slide, Joanna. So I think that as a piece of research, this stands alone and really gives us guidance. But one of the things I really like is when different threads of research seem to converge in the same direction. So previously, we saw that Buckingham and Goodall, kind of trying to understand really engagement in organizations, found that they could predict team performance by safety and engagement values with my teammates. We might also call that dependability. Well, from an entirely different direction, some of you may remember Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. One of the best-selling management books of the last 20 years. So, of course, Patrick Lencioni wrote this in the idea of a business fable, a narrative about a team that wasn't working very well. And he described their problems in the order of dysfunctions, right? They didn't trust each other. They were afraid of conflict. They couldn't commit to each other. And he very intentionally puts these in a pyramidal structure because he feels that these are layers of things one needs to address in order to be an effective team. Well, if I turn this around to a prescription for functional teams, what does it say? Well, it says the first thing we have to do is establish trust. And then we have to learn how to deal with conflict. And then we need to be able to build commitment to each other, which then lets us embrace accountability. And only then can we actually focus on results. And sure, to my mind, this is a 1-to-1 mapping, or people have 5-to-2 mapping, of something that he learned working with executive teams and what Google tells us from 3 years of research with a couple of 100 software development teams. So I feel pretty good about this. And when I'm coaching Scrum Masters and managers, this is the thing I come back to them about. It's like, this seems like soft, squishy stuff, but software is made by people. And this is how people operate. So if we want our teams to be successful, if we want them to be fluent, we have to help them develop these capabilities. So personally, then, what I think that leads us to is a model about what we need to do to help teams move through fluency, how we have to help them achieve the levels that they're working at. Usually the first thing we do, hey, we're going to scrumify our enterprise. So we're going to get a bunch of coaches, and we're going to teach everybody to scrum, and we're going to do our daily scrums, and we're going to do our sprint planning, and we're going to figure out how to estimate and story points, and we're going to write user stories, and we're going to juggle up these teams, and away they go. Which is all fine and well. Those are useful and valuable schemes, skills and practices, but that's not what's going to determine the team's ultimate success. What we need to work on first is the health of the team. Do they know how to operate as a collaborative, functioning, trust-based, psychologically safe group of individuals doing complex work together? If they can do that, then we have a team that can actually attend to focusing, because they can actually work together. They're learning how to collaborate, to trust, to make commitments, to begin to take in all of the other elements that we talk about when we talk about an agile transformation. They can actually talk to one another about agile principles. They can say, hey, we seem to be falling short, or they can say, hey, I don't understand this, help me learn. So at the first stage, we're trying to develop stability of the team, which really relates to this idea of learning how to be a team more than anything else. Now, I've worked with teams that really never got this. They were never great teams. They were fundamentally dysfunctional, actually. And by switching from being sort of waterfallish to scrummish, they actually got better. They did better. They might have been twice as productive as they were before. But their growth was completely capped. They were never going to develop beyond that because as a team, they could not work together. So the first stage is helping to build this pyramid, as you will, of team functionality that lets them really achieve the level of focusing. and then that builds the platform where they can begin to work together in a conscious practice. And this, I think, correlates to the level of delivering. This is where we start to see teams that are really beginning to take off and achieving the kinds of results that Diana and James have talked about. They've really ingrained practices. They're really beginning to leverage them. They are really fulfilling themselves as a team. And finally, what we're trying to allow them to do is develop the teams to the point that they can take over their own development. And that's the optimizing. We're not driving the teams are driving us as leaders and as an organization. That's a level of mastery. And we need to do a lot of things to support them in that. But we have to first and foremost make sure that they're strong enough teams to do this. And of course, we have to do this in an organization with many teams where the teams, we try to make them stable, but there are changes and new people come in and, demands from the organization change. So it's a very dynamic environment, and all this is in some degree of flux all the time. But that's why, when a couple of years ago, I was at an Agile conference and I talked to somebody from Salesforce. Salesforce, the great Agile success story. And I asked him what he did. He says, well, I'm a coach at Salesforce. I'm like, why do you need Agile coaches at Salesforce? And he says, things change. New people come in. People move around. We acquire companies. There's always a need to keep going back and building this fundamental. So I love this quote from James' book. The job of a coach is to help the team become independently fluent. And by coach, in this context, I'm going to assume that means everyone who's supporting the team, personnel managers, senior leadership, the people who do organizational design around them, the people who are actually hired as coaches or scrum masters. Our job is to help the team become independently fluent. I just love that. So, in practice, what does that look like? Well, in the first phase, we're going to focus on team health and self-sufficiency. I don't know how many are familiar with the modern Agile approach, where they say make safety a prerequisite. That is number one. That's the first thing we need to attend to with teams. Help them build psychological safety. And of course, we have to support them then with an organizational safety, right? We need to reinforce that those teams can be safe. Work on communication. People don't necessarily know how to talk well. And so they don't know how to disagree well, and they don't know how to commit. So we need to do basic things like helping, whether it's giving people something like a Myers-Briggs or a, Bono's 6 hats, some way to understand what their modes are of communicating and how they're going to work together. We need to demonstrate the values of trust and respect and support that indicate that they're working in a culture that will allow them to operate this well. And we need to focus on rewarding team success. We need to make the migration away from rewarding individuals and let teams know that it's the team productivity and success that we're celebrating. Then we can help the teams deliver on the Agile promise, which begins to address things that are outside of the team's direct scope of control. We need to remove systemic impediments like dependencies across teams. If they can't release and deploy their own software, they're held captive. If we don't have a technical architecture that allows people to modify services and APIs and such, again, they'll be slaves to whatever other dependency they rely on. So we need to look at what's happening in the whole system and environment that allows those teams to be successful. We want to help them continue to ingrain all these lean and agile skills so that they know how to apply them to their own context. Drive the notion of quality by design. So quality isn't an afterthought, it's something we build in. And James talks about zero friction development. So we want to drive friction to zero. There's no cost to deploying. There's no cost to getting feedback. There's no cost to the team working the way they're doing to deliver value. And then finally, assuming we can do that, if we've removed the systemic improvements and the teams are self-functional at this point, we need to get out of their way. We need to organize for autonomy. We need to make sure that teams are able to pursue value and work with customers. We want to align everyone on that axis of saying, there are your customers. Here's what they need. Go get them, get out of their way. And that sort of requires that we organize our entire operation around systems of discovery and exploration so that teams can go find their customers, can learn truly what they're doing, perform experiments, and get the feedback they need. So that's kind of my view of how we go from starting with scratch to really being able to fulfill this notion of fluency. It all begins with building teams that are robust and successful. And it's all the soft stuff. All right. So what we thought we would do right now is put everybody in breakout rooms for, what do you think, 5 minutes, Diana?
Yeah. While you're in your breakout rooms, I want you to do some stretching and some shoulder rolls and things like that. So make sure you're getting loosened up. This is a long time to sit. But yeah, maybe 7 minutes in
Okay.
in breakout rooms. Yeah.
Do I have to wait for the breakout rooms to stretch?
No, you don't have
No,
to
you
wait.
can start on it right now.
I don't.
All right.
I don't. You don't have to.
I
Yeah.
am ready to launch the breakout rooms.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we have 4 breakout rooms.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Are you firing those off, Volker?
I'm queuing it up. I am ready to
Okay,
launch
I'll
us
let you
into
do that.
breakouts.
Okay.
and what are we discussing?
What are your questions? Out of all the things that we said, what would you like us to talk about a little bit more? And for each group to come up with maybe just 1 or 2 things that you all coalesce around and you think we really would like to hear more about this. And then when we come back, you'll put them into the chat.
Great.
Cool. I just added that in the chat,
The
so we
chat,
can
yeah.
remember and have fun.
So we've got some questions coming in, Barry. Do we want to start answering them or asking?
Sure.
them?
Why don't you just start at the top?
Okay,
So-
where do we go? All right, right there we go. How do you overcome mixed messages from coaches versus leadership?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're noticing that happening, I think you want to go to the source and start talking about, create a conversation between coaches and leaders about where they are delivering mixed messages and where that's coming from. I'm a big believer in sort of naming the elephant in the room, acknowledging it, and because until you acknowledge it, you can't do anything about it. And as coaches, I think we need to be supporting our teams, but we also need to stay consistent with the messages that the organization is giving. And if we're uncomfortable with those messages, then we need to talk to somebody about that. I don't know, Barry, what do you
I
have to say
completely
about it?
agree. And, having been in that situation many times, it's like, well, the leadership is saying one thing, I thought I was coming here to deliver maybe a little different message.
Right.
And I often have, people come to me and say, well, I'm bought into this, but then my manager came and, told me to forget the team's sprint commitment and wants me to do this other project.
Mhm.
The best option that I can advise people is, okay, assuming that this is a management driven initiative, it wasn't you crazy team decided to go do Scrum. It's like, generally this is part of a large scale, let's all go be
Yeah.
Agile. I ask people to, reflect on, okay, what was the agreement, implicit or
Mhm.
explicit? We said we were, as an organization, we're moving to do Scrum or Agile. These are the principles. This is the method we operate. You agreed with that, right? You told us to do this. So now what you're telling me seems inconsistent. Can we have a talk about that? Can you, is there something I'm missing here? Or, do we need to revisit essentially the implicit agreement we have that you told us to do this, so we're doing it now?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I find that helps, that's the sort of, it's a scary thing for people to go confront their leadership that says, you used to want to tell me to do everything. Now you're saying we have agency, except when you want to tell me to do something. So how do we get back to a principle that we both agreed on that we can operate on?
Right. And there's some coaching that needs to happen for managers as well.
Yeah.
Another question is, are organizations willing to invest? How do you get them to? We see a ton of organizations that don't. Well, so I'm semi-famous in the Agile world for saying I am not in the convincing business. I'm not interested in convincing anybody of anything. I will share things that I know, and I will share information, but I'm not going to try to convince anybody of anything. And that's part of the genesis of the Agile Fluency model, is that using that business benefit sheet and using the model, we start talking about, well, what do you really need from your teams? And we listen to what the leaders have to say to us about that. And when they come to some conclusions about what they want and what they need, then we partner with them to help them get that. And so we're never trying to push something on them or get them to do anything. And we have a conversation. We use James and I think different people use different techniques, but James and I tend to use a technique that's very much like the XP planning game. And we work with leaders. After we give them a report back about where, they said they wanted their teams to be here, and this, now we're telling them where are they now. And we talk about the gap and what of that we believe the teams are going to take care of, and what of that is systemic and needs managers to step up to. Then we lay that all out and we say, okay, what can you invest in? What are you willing to invest in? What trade-offs are you willing to make? Let's lay it out and figure out what's going to happen when are our checkpoints. And we usually don't plan out more than a few months. Here's what we're going to do to enable the teams over the next few months. And some of that's going to be systemic. Some of that's going to be supporting initiatives that the teams want to do. And then we just keep doing feedback loops on that. Okay, so now we've done that. This is the outcome of that. Now what are we going to do next? And so it's a leader and team driven conversation. So we're not ever trying to get them to invest in anything. We're helping them as they choose what they want to invest in, the outcomes that they're looking for, which is why we don't go for just one framework or one methodology.
How do you get them to want the conversation?
Well,
So that was
okay. Okay. Well, so like I said, I don't convince anybody of anything. If people don't want to change, I'm not the right consultant for them.
fair enough.
And so that's one of the first things I try to discover. Is there any willingness to make a shift? I mean, you contacted me, you must have had something in mind.
You must have had a question,
right? And if you're not, if what you want is me to come in and make it okay for you to keep everything exactly the same as it's always been, I'm probably not the right consultant for you. I can give you some recommendations maybe of people who will help you with that, but I'm not the right person for that. One, because I don't think it can be successful, and I'm not really, and I'm very transparent about, I'm not interested in engaging in initiatives that I think can't possibly be successful. That's, for me, there's enough people out there who really want to do it that I'll just go find one of them. And
yeah.
I'm just kind of really straight. Some people used to call me a visionary pragmatist. I'm very pragmatic in my consulting. It's like, I'll take you anywhere you want to go in your vision, but we're going to go there in a practical kind of way, or I'm not going along. So I don't know.
There's a whole bunch of companies out there that say, oh, well, we hired a bunch of developers, testers, whatever,
Right.
who have Agile experience. We must be Agile.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
What's
right.
What's this fluency stuff? Of course we're fluent. We hired a bunch of people who know Agile.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's that whole Agile done well, so that the organization is getting benefits. If the organization is not getting the benefits that they thought they were going to get, well, then that's the conversation. It's like, why do you think that's happening? Let's look into that.
And to,
Yeah.
to Diana's point, I think the conversation starts with, well, you know, why are we talking, or why are you asking the question? Is there something that you think should be different or better? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to concede that probably, since you're asking the question and what you're doing isn't getting you there, you probably need to do something different? Yeah, probably so. Okay. Well, do you have any ideas what that different thing might be? I can give you some data that says that these things tend to go in this direction. Do you have a better plan?
Yeah. So the next question, why don't you take this next one, Barry? Working as an
Okay.
individual who's directed by others and transitioning to working as a team can be difficult and uncomfortable. Oh, absolutely. How do
Oof,
you get
yeah.
people to embark on that?
Yes. Yes, that can be very tough. And sometimes you may be inheriting a history with a team or a group that had, you know, these are people who have suffered some traumas together based on the organization they've been with, or managers or something like that. So, you know, I think trust is tough, right? The thing that we need to do is find things we agree on and find areas of commonality that help us understand one another as human beings, not as, you know, QA or SDETs or Java developers or whatever else. And one of the side effects, I think unintended, of kind of a classical way of organizing groups is we organize them by roles and function. And so then our picture of a person is that person in their function and their role. And so when I find teams that are heavily in that way, yeah, the idea that they're going to somehow be vulnerable to their partners and, you know, talk about stuff they maybe don't know how to do or don't understand is a really challenging thing. So, you know, typically this is where we just start with, you know, team meetings about agreements, fostering conversations about communication styles. How do you want to be disagreed with? How do you want to have discussions? What else do we have in common outside of the things that we do here for a work context? How do we begin to view each other as more common than different? You know, it's so I'm not sure I could negotiate a Middle East peace, but I've had pretty good luck with individual teams sort of taking it back to the level of, hey, let's understand each other a little bit as people. And what we're probably going to find out is we actually have things in common we didn't realize. And I've put teams through retrospectives where these people have worked together for several years, but they didn't realize that so-and-so had, you know, done a gap year in, you know, some part of Europe, or I didn't know you really like to cook, or, hey, I like photography too. So fostering that kind of collaboration is really a good step to then anything that's going to come after that. What do you think,
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah. Well, and you highlighted the Liftoff book earlier on, and that's a place that I like to start. Is if we're now taking a bunch of individual contributors and putting them into the team, let's spend some time helping them become a team.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a ton of time, but there has to be some focus on giving, you know, helping them understand their charter. What's the work that we are expecting them to do together, and then let's talk with them about what does their experience tell them about how they want to do that work together. And we start doing some work focused things. We're not out on ropes courses. We're doing work focused things, but we're also building the team as a part of doing that. And I think that becomes just really critically important. And you know, there's also, I also, you know, talk to people a lot about, you know, kind of what your point about Karl Malone. You know, you can be really great as a team if you learn some things about how to do that. You know, are you interested in being able to have a really great time at work? And a lot of people are so jaded and so traumatized by workplaces they've been in before that that's very difficult for them. And so we have to do it in just kind of little baby steps, you know, little bite-sized pieces of how do we get there? How do we get there? But I definitely think that starting with some chartering, some intention around we're going to work together as a team now, the nature of the work is going to be team-based now. Years and years and years ago, I was doing work process redesign and team development work long before I knew anything about Agile. And there was an organization where we went in to do some workplace redesign. They weren't getting out of their work processes what they wanted. And so what we did was we came in and we talked with the teams about, they know the work, they knew how to do it best. And they decided that they wanted to be self-managing, fairly autonomous, cross-functional teams. Well, there was one guy in the department who his whole identity was wrapped up in the fact that he was the only one that people could come to for a certain kind of information.
Mhm.
And moving into a team structure was so threatening to him because he didn't think he had anything else to offer. And he didn't make it. I mean, he ended up needing to leave the department. And I mean, luckily it was a government agency, so they found another place for him. But that happens. Not everybody can make that shift into team-based work. And for those folks, we need to find places where individual contributor work is still appropriate and they can make a good fit for that. And then we can take everybody else who's willing to be a part of a team on a really
Right.
great journey. But it's important to notice who can make it and who can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you called out a good point that people who are having a difficult time aren't necessarily doing so because they're just innately obstreperous, but they have an identity. They've been successful. They've established a name for themselves, and they're concerned that they're going to lose that if they go into this. So sometimes we can be successful and help people understand, well, trying to get behind that. What does concern you? Well, how about this is a different way to provide value and interact and gain respect among your peers. Sometimes it works. You're right. There's a certain percentage of people who just do not want to work in teams. And after a certain point, you have to say, okay, let's find a place where you're going to be happy.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's a question here about what kinds of trainings do you offer in addition to the basic practices? I'm not Volker, I guess I need to know a little more about that.
I
But
mean, so much about Agile coaching starts with,
Right.
here's the Scrum training. This is a story point. This is how
oh, okay. All
you do
right.
your estimating and
Yeah.
your ceremonies, so that everybody at least has a shared language and a shared concept.
Right.
And then beyond that, if communication and the team building is so important,
Yeah.
what tools or trainings or programs do you use to foster
Right.
that?
Well, I like to start by working with managers. So I would be working with them around Agile Fluency and around how their role is going to change and how it's different to manage in a team-based organization than maybe it was to manage in an individual contributor organization. And we talk about complexity and we talk about systems thinking and we talk about managing a work process rather than managing individual people, things like that. So I think those are really important. I like to get the leadership ready to be supportive before I start working with the teams. And that might also mean talking to HR and talking to facilities or, different parts of the organization that are going to have to be on board. I like to start there and then move into, okay, now we've begun to till the soil a little bit. So now we can start working with teams. And, then it's, can we do team self-selection? Well, no, there's something else going on. Well, then let's figure out how we're going to decide how these teams should be put together. So there's a whole series of things that need to happen depending on where you're starting from. So, I mean, it's very much an it depends question.
Yeah,
And yeah.
To follow up on that, I think Diana will agree with me that, training is a great place to start, but we can only train things that are very broad based. Like, yeah, I can train somebody in Scrum, and in a couple of days they will know the principles. Fluency is all about knowing where you are on a journey and what is the next good step. And that tends to be highly individualized to teams and organizations. And so I think, this is going to sound like, yeah, that's right, this is a consultant trying to sell consulting. But if you are at a spot that you think, well, we need to make another step, we're not going to do that with the 2-day training class. We need to come in and help people understand the challenge that they're facing and work, in work to get through it.
Yeah.
So, I don't do let's say when I'm consulting a client, I'll do an Agile 101 session teaching this thing, but I always pair that with a workshop. It's like, okay, let's go look at your backlog and see how you can apply these things today on this thing. Because if we can't do that, then we can't, people can't really learn. We can't really affect any change.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to go in and figure out what you need at that point and have someone that you can trust to help you take the next step.
Right. And just have a sense of what the landscape is.
Yeah.
I mean, go into this team. It's like, I don't know how many teams I've gone into where somebody's just said they need communication training. What is that? Written, spoken? What are we talking about here? And a lot of times that may mean they don't know how to give each other feedback, like peer to peer, to help their working together improve. But not always. Sometimes it's something completely different. So yeah, it's much more customized to what are the needs of this team now. There's not a prescriptive way to go through it. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm watching time. So
Yeah,
let's say
okay.
we have time for another question. And considering that we're all in this hybrid world, I'm noticing a question from Michael about, how have things changed with this shift into remote that is probably here to stay, or at least sort of serious hybrid, whatever people are figuring out. Maybe you can share a little bit about your experience for the last 15 months, 16 months.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is we turned our diagnostic into an online diagnostic, that's for sure. But also, it's not that different. I mean, we used to say team, if you can at all possible, have co-located teams. Well, mostly that was because of, what it says in the Agile Manifesto principles and things, that teams that can get together and have good communication and so on do better work together. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Well, that means, okay, so we're in a remote world. So what are we providing folks in a virtual space where they can feel like a team? Do they have, how many teams did I walk into where they had no video capability? The only thing they could do when they're working remote was see the code. They couldn't see each other at all. They couldn't even, in some instances, even their audio was not that great. Well, you're not giving them a good team room to do work in when you're giving them that. And so teams still need a team room, whether it's virtual or whether it's physical. So a lot of things change, but it's more adaptive than it is doing things completely differently. Looking for, there were lots of folks who said you couldn't possibly, with Chris coming to your meeting next month, lots of people who said you couldn't possibly do mob programming unless everybody was sitting together. But in fact, mob programming has turned out to work really well in a remote space. So it's, that's what I think about the remote questions. It's challenging. And like we were saying earlier about having human solutions to human problems, making sure we're not trying to use technical solutions to problems that are actually human problems, but using technical solutions where they fit for technical problems. So there's those kinds of things. Now we have to be more discriminating about those things.
Anything to add from you, Ed and Barry, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I agree with Diana. I think right now we're in the infancy of learning how to work remotely well. And I am always going to advocate to try to get people to face because depending on what study you use, we lose X% of communication when we lose nonverbal communication. And, even looking at your faces now, I still can't actually see your whole body. So I don't really know how you're reacting, but at least I can see you. If we turn the video off, suddenly, boom, I've lost, another huge percent. So I do believe face-to-face is better. I think what we can do is I have had reasonable success following the same kind of techniques I do in a live session, which is when I'm trying to get people to like share ideas and stuff. I look for techniques that allow for balanced input from everyone and don't allow for, like the most talkative person to take over. So that's why, tools to get people to, write things down and share them and solicit all that. So, for each of these hurdles, we can sit down and say, okay, how do I overcome that problem? I still believe until we have much more immersive remote environments and better tools, better virtual whiteboards and that kind of stuff, it's always going to be an uphill struggle. So we just kind of have to tackle it one at a time. How am I going to get people to share something visual? How am I going to give them a tool to do this? So it's painstaking right now. You just have to devote a lot of effort trying to think about how to overcome those handicaps.
Yeah.
Awesome, very good. So thank you very much, Diane and Barry. That was awesome and a good reminder of how to think in sort of stages and not jump into the deep end, which certainly I've fallen prey to that idea. Let's do it great first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So appreciate it. And thank you for your insights in the question and answers. So now we are going to open the breakout rooms. And these are breakout rooms that you self-select into.